Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. In the attic of an old ivy-clad Victorian house on the outskirts of the sleepy town of Black Hollow, there stood a mirror unlike any other. It was an ornate floor-length mirror with a frame carved from dark mahogany, its surface etched with intricate patterns of vines and flowers. The glass itself was flawless, its reflection so clear and vivid that it seemed to pull you in. But this mirror was no ordinary-looking glass. It was said to reflect a different reality, a world that was almost like ours but not quite. A world where the rules were different, where the impossible became possible, and where the line between truth and illusion blurred. The mirror had been in the house for as long as anyone could remember, passed down through generations of the Blackwood family. But it was not a cherished heirloom. It was a secret, a cursed object that the family kept hidden away, its existence known only to a select few. For the mirror was not just a window into another world, it was a gateway. And those who gazed into it for too long risked being pulled into its depths, never to return. The house had stood empty for years, its windows boarded up and its gardens overgrown. But one summer, a young woman named Clara inherited the property. Clara was a writer, a dreamer with a fascination for the strange and the unexplained. She had grown up hearing stories about the Blackwood family and their mysterious mirror, but she had always dismissed them as fanciful tales. Now, standing in the dusty attic with the mirror before her, she couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. The mirror was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, and the carvings on its frame seemed to shift and move when she looked at them too long. Clara reached out to touch the glass, her fingers trembling with anticipation. And then she saw it, her reflection. But it wasn't her. The woman in the mirror looked like Clara, but her eyes were darker, her smile sharper. She wore a dress that Clara didn't own, and behind her was a room that Clara didn't recognize. It was a grand, opulent space, filled with strange objects and flickering candlelight. Clara stepped back, her heart pounding. What is this?" she whispered. The reflection tilted its head, its smile widening. "This is elsewhere," it said, its voice a perfect mimicry of Clara's own. "A world just like yours, but better. Don't you want to see?" Clara shook her head, her mind reeling. "This isn't real. It's just a trick." The reflection laughed, a sound that sent chills down Clara's spine. "Oh, it's very real, and it's waiting for you." Before Clara could respond, the reflection reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. The surface rippled like water, and Clara felt a sudden, irresistible pull. She tried to step back, but her feet wouldn't obey. The mirror was drawing her in, its power too strong to resist. And then, with a sound like a sigh, Clara was pulled through the glass. The world on the other side was both familiar and alien. The air was thick with the scent of roses and something else, something metallic, like blood. The room she stood in was the same one she had seen in the mirror, but now it felt real, tangible. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange objects, jars of glowing liquid, clocks that ticked backward, and books with titles written in languages she couldn't read. And then there was the reflection, or rather the woman who had been her reflection. She stood before Clara, her smile sharp and predatory. "Welcome to Elsewhere," she said. "I've been waiting for you." Clara's heart raced. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. "I'm you. Or rather, the version of you that belongs here. And you're the version that belongs there." Clara shook her head, her mind reeling. This isn't possible. This is just a dream. The reflection, her double, laughed. Oh, it's very real. And now that you're here, you can't go back. Not unless you find the key. The key? Clara asked, her voice trembling. Her double nodded. The key to the mirror. It's hidden somewhere in this world. Find it, and you can return to your reality. But be careful. This world is not kind to intruders. Clara spent what felt like days exploring the world of elsewhere. It was a place of contradictions, where the sun never set but the stars were always visible, where the trees grew upside down and the rivers flowed backward. The people she met were strange and unsettling, their faces familiar, but their eyes cold and empty. They spoke in riddles and half-truths, their words designed to confuse and mislead. But Clara was determined. She followed every clue, every hint, until she finally found herself standing before a door. It was a small, unassuming door, its surface carved with the same patterns as the mirror's frame. And there, hanging from a hook, was the key. Clara reached for it, her fingers trembling. But as she did, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, and there was her double, her smile sharp and predatory. You found it, her double said. But do you really think you deserve to leave? Clara's heart raced. This isn't my world. I don't belong here. Her double stepped closer, her eyes gleaming. But you do. You've always belonged here. You just didn't know it. Clara shook her head, her grip tightening on the key. Number, I'm going home. And with that, she turned and unlocked the door. The world around her began to dissolve, the colors fading to black. And then, with a sound like a sigh, Clara was back in the attic, the mirror standing before her. The mirror was silent now, its surface still and lifeless. Clara stared at it, her heart pounding. She had escaped, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was still watching her, waiting for her to return. She covered it with a sheet and locked the attic door, vowing never to open it again. But sometimes, late at night, she would hear a soft, melodic laugh, a sound that sent chills down her spine. And she would wonder if she had truly escaped, or if a part of her was still trapped in elsewhere. The mirror that reflects a different reality. In the heart of the sprawling, decrepit Blackthorn estate, there was a room that no one dared to enter. It was a small, unassuming chamber tucked away on the second floor, its door warped with age and its handle rusted shut. The room had no windows, and the air inside was said to be so heavy that it felt like wading through water. But what made the room truly infamous was the phenomenon that occurred every night without fail. At precisely midnight, the walls would begin to cry. The tears were not metaphorical. They were real, tangible droplets of water that seeped from the cracks in the plaster and trickled down the walls in rivulets. The sound was unmistakable, a soft, mournful weeping that echoed through the empty halls of the estate. The servants called it the weeping room, and they avoided it at all costs. They said the room was cursed, that it was a place where the sorrow of the past lingered, trapped within its walls. The Blackthorn family had long since abandoned the estate, leaving it in the care of a small, loyal staff. Among them was a young groundskeeper named Thomas, who had come to the estate seeking work after the death of his father. Thomas was a practical man, not given to superstition, but even he couldn't deny the strange occurrences that plagued the estate. One night, unable to sleep, Thomas decided to investigate the weeping room. He had heard the stories, of course, but he had always dismissed them as the ramblings of superstitious minds. But the sound of weeping had been growing louder each night, and he could no longer ignore it. He made his way to the second floor, his lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. The door to the weeping room was just as he had heard, warped and rusted, its handle cold to the touch. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was small and sparse, its walls bare, and its floor covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was heavy, just as the servants had said, and the sound of weeping was almost deafening. Thomas stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. And then he saw it, the tears. They were everywhere, seeping from the walls and pooling on the floor. The sound was unbearable, a cacophony of sorrow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Thomas felt a coldness seep into his bones, a sense of despair that made his chest tighten. He turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind him. The sound of weeping grew louder, more insistent, and Thomas felt a presence in the room, a cold, unyielding force that seemed to press down on him. "Who's there?" he called, his voice trembling. The weeping stopped, and the room was plunged into silence. And then from the shadows a figure emerged. It was a woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch across eternity. She was dressed in a tattered gown, her hair hanging in limp strands around her face. Thomas recognized her immediately. It was Eleanor Blackthorne, the wife of the estate's original owner. "Eleanor," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. Eleanor's eyes met his, and he felt a jolt of recognition, as if she had been waiting for him. "You have come," she said, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I have waited so long." Thomas's heart raced. "What do you want?" Eleanor's expression softened, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "I want to be free. This room is my prison, and you, my dear, are the key." Thomas hesitated. He had heard the stories of cursed places, of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond his understanding. But there was something in Eleanor's voice, something that made him want to believe. "If I help you, what happens to me?" Thomas asked. Eleanor's smile was sad, her expression almost pleading. "You will be free of me, free of this place, and I will be free to leave, to find peace." Thomas took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew the risks, but he also knew that he couldn't live with the sound of weeping hanging over him. He nodded. "I'll do it." The next night, Thomas returned to the weeping room with a sledgehammer in hand. The room was just as he had left it, its walls weeping and its air heavy with sorrow. He took a deep breath and raised the hammer. For a moment, he hesitated, his hand trembling. And then, with a cry, he brought the hammer down on the wall. The plaster shattered with a sound like a scream, and the air was filled with a blinding light. Thomas stumbled back, shielding his eyes, and when the light faded, the room was gone. In its place was an empty space, the walls reduced to rubble, and Eleanor was gone. The estate was quiet after that, the air lighter, the shadows less oppressive. Thomas never saw Eleanor again, but he often felt a presence, a warmth that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He liked to think that Eleanor had found her freedom, that she was finally at peace. But sometimes, late at night, Thomas would hear a soft, mournful weeping, a sound that sent chills down his spine. And he would wonder if Eleanor had truly left, or if she had simply found a new room, the room where the walls cry at midnight. In the grand echoing halls of Blackthorne Manor, there hung a portrait that had been the subject of whispered rumors for generations. The painting depicted a young woman with piercing green eyes, her lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Her name was Isabella Blackthorne, the daughter of the manor's original owner, and her portrait was said to be cursed. The servants claimed that the portrait smiled when no one was looking, its expression shifting from serene to sly the moment one turned their back. The family dismissed these tales as superstition, but those who had lived in the manor knew better. They had seen the portrait smile for themselves. The manor had stood for centuries, its stone walls weathered by time, and its halls filled with the echoes of the past. It was a place of grandeur and decay, of beauty and darkness. The Blackthorne family had long since abandoned it, leaving it in the care of a small staff who maintained the estate out of loyalty or fear. Among them was a young maid named Eliza, who had come to the manor seeking work after the death of her parents. Eliza was a practical girl, not given to flights of fancy. She had heard the stories about the portrait, of course, but she paid them no mind. To her, it was just a painting, a relic of a bygone era. But that all changed one fateful evening. It was late, and the manor was quiet. Eliza had been tasked with cleaning the grand hall, a cavernous room lined with portraits of the Blackthorn family. The air was thick with the scent of dust and polish, and the only sound was the soft swish of her broom. As she worked, she felt a strange sensation, as if she were being watched. She glanced around the room, her eyes falling on the portrait of Isabella. The painting was as it always was, Isabella's green eyes staring out from the canvas, her lips curved in that faint, enigmatic smile. Eliza shook her head, chiding herself for being so jumpy, and returned to her work. But as she turned her back, she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the rustle of fabric. She spun around, her heart pounding, but the room was empty. The portrait was unchanged, its subject as serene as ever. Eliza tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, a prickling at the back of her neck. She finished her work quickly and left the hall, eager to be away from the portrait. Over the next few days, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She began to notice small changes in the manor. A door left ajar, a candle extinguished, a faint whisper in the empty halls. And always there was the portrait, its eyes seeming to follow her wherever she went. One night, unable to sleep, Eliza decided to confront her fears. She made her way to the grand hall, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. The portrait hung in its usual place, its subject as serene as ever. Eliza approached it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Isabella," she whispered, her voice trembling, "if you're here, show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened, and then slowly the portrait began to change. Isabella's smile widened, her lips curving into a sly, almost predatory grin. Her eyes, once serene, now gleamed with a malevolent light. Eliza stumbled back, her lantern slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. The room was plunged into darkness, and Eliza felt a coldness seep into her bones. She heard a soft, melodic laugh, a sound that sent chills down her spine. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Isabella. She was as beautiful as her portrait, her green eyes gleaming in the dim light. But there was something wrong, something unnatural. Her movements were too fluid, too graceful, and her smile was too wide, too sharp. "You called," Isabella said, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "And I have come." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "What do you want?" Isabella's smile widened. "I want what I have always wanted. Freedom. This portrait is my prison, and you, my dear, are the key." Eliza shook her head, her mind reeling. "I don't understand." Isabella stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "The portrait binds me to this place, but it also gives me power. Power to influence the world beyond the canvas. And with your help, I can break free." Eliza's heart raced. "What do you need me to do?" Isabella's eyes gleamed. "I need you to destroy the portrait." Eliza hesitated. She had heard the stories of cursed objects, of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond her understanding. But there was something in Isabella's voice, something that made her want to believe. "If I destroy the portrait, what happens to you?" Eliza asked. Isabella's smile softened, her expression almost pleading. "I will be free, free to leave this place, to live again. And you, my dear, will be free of me." Eliza took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew the risks, but she also knew that she couldn't live with the portrait's presence hanging over her. She nodded. "I'll do it." The next morning, Eliza returned to the grand hall with a hammer in hand. The portrait hung in its usual place, its subject as serene as ever. But Eliza could feel Isabella's presence, a coldness that seemed to emanate from the canvas. She took a deep breath and raised the hammer. For a moment she hesitated, her hand trembling. And then, with a cry, she brought the hammer down on the portrait. The canvas tore with a sound like a scream, and the air was filled with a blinding light. Eliza stumbled back, shielding her eyes, and when the light faded, the portrait was gone. In its place was an empty frame, the canvas reduced to tatters, and Isabella was gone. The manor was quiet after that, the air lighter, the shadows less oppressive. Eliza never saw Isabella again, but she often felt a presence, a warmth that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She liked to think that Isabella had found her freedom, that she was finally at peace. But sometimes late at night, Eliza would hear a soft, melodic laugh, a sound that sent chills down her spine. And she would wonder if Isabella had truly left, or if she had simply found a new canvas, the portrait that smiles when no one is looking. In the heart of the sprawling countryside, far from the bustling cities and crowded towns, there lay a hill that defied nature itself. It was known as the Hill of Stillness, a place where the wind never blew. No matter how fierce the storms raged in the surrounding valleys or how the trees swayed in the distance, the hill remained eerily calm, its air stagnant and unmoving. The grass on the hill grew unnaturally straight, never bending to the will of the breeze, and the silence was so profound that it felt as though the world itself held its breath. The Hill of Stillness was a place of mystery, a place that seemed to exist outside the natural order. The locals avoided it, whispering tales of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. They said that the hill was cursed, that it was a place where time stood still and the souls of the lost wandered. But for a young woman named Clara, the hill was a place of fascination, a puzzle she was determined to solve. Clara had always been drawn to the unknown. As a child, she would spend hours exploring the woods and fields near her home, her imagination conjuring tales of hidden worlds and ancient secrets. But the Hill of Stillness was different. It was a place that seemed to defy explanation, a place that called to her in ways she couldn't understand. One crisp autumn morning, Clara set out for the hill, her backpack filled with provisions and a notebook to document her findings. The journey took her through golden fields and dense forests, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. As she approached the hill, the world seemed to grow quieter, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves fading into silence. When she reached the base of the hill, she paused, her breath catching in her throat. The hill loomed before her, its grassy slopes bathed in the soft light of the morning sun. The air was still, unnaturally so, and the silence was almost oppressive. Clara took a deep breath and began to climb. The higher she climbed, the stranger the hill became. The grass beneath her feet was unnaturally stiff, as if frozen in time. The air was thick and heavy, and she felt a strange pressure, as if the hill itself were watching her. When she reached the summit, she found herself standing in a small, circular clearing. In the center of the clearing was a stone, its surface smooth and worn, with strange symbols etched into its surface. Clara approached the stone, her heart pounding. The symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen, their shapes twisting and curling like the branches of a tree. She reached out to touch the stone, and as her fingers brushed its surface, she felt a jolt of energy, a surge of power that seemed to flow through her. And then she heard it, a voice faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Welcome, Seeker." Clara spun around, her eyes scanning the clearing, but there was no one there. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper on the edge of her consciousness. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The voice responded, its tone calm and measured. "I am the keeper of this place, the guardian of the Hill of Stillness. You have come seeking answers, but are you prepared for the truth?" Clara hesitated, her mind racing. What truth? The truth of the hill, the voice replied. It is a place outside of time, a place where the natural laws do not apply. It is a sanctuary, but also a prison. Those who enter its bounds are bound to it, their souls tethered to its stillness. Clara's heart raced as she realized the implications. Are you saying I'm trapped here? The voice was silent for a moment, as if considering her question. Not yet, but the hill has claimed many over the centuries, their souls lost to its silence. If you wish to leave, you must uncover the secret of the stone. Only then will the hill release you. Clara turned her attention back to the stone, her mind racing. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her notebook, sketching the symbols as quickly as she could. As she worked, she felt a strange connection to the stone, as if it were communicating with her, guiding her hand. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hill. Clara's fingers ached, and her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she refused to give up. She was close. She could feel it. And then, as the last light of the sun disappeared below the horizon, she understood. The symbols were not just random markings. They were a map, a guide to the hill's secret. They told the story of a ritual, a way to break the hill's hold and free the souls trapped within. Clara followed the instructions, her hands trembling as she traced the symbols in the air. The stone began to glow, its light growing brighter and brighter until it filled the clearing. The air around her began to stir, the stillness giving way to a gentle breeze. And then, with a sound like a sigh, the hill released its hold. The wind returned, sweeping across the hill with a force that made Clara stagger. The grass bent and swayed, and the silence was broken by the sound of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. Clara felt a weight lift from her chest, a sense of freedom she hadn't realized she'd lost. The hill of stillness was no longer still. The curse had been broken, and the souls trapped within were free. Clara stood at the summit, the wind whipping through her hair, and felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever known. But as she made her way down the hill, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hill was not entirely free of its past. The stone still stood at its summit, its symbols faint but visible. And though the wind now blew freely across its slopes, there was a part of the hill that remained untouched, a place where the air was still and the silence lingered. Clara knew that the hill of stillness would always be a place of mystery, a place where the natural and the supernatural intertwined. And though she had uncovered its secret, she knew that there were still questions left unanswered, still mysteries waiting to be solved. The hill where the wind never blows. Deep within the heart of the Blackwood Forest, where the sunlight barely pierced the dense canopy, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, there stood a tree unlike any other. It was an ancient oak, its gnarled branches twisting and curling like the fingers of a skeletal hand. The bark was blackened, as if scorched by some long-forgotten fire, and its roots sprawled out like serpents, digging deep into the earth. But what truly set this tree apart were the objects that hung from its branches. Dozens of them, swaying gently in the breeze, their shapes unmistakable. They were bodies. The villagers of Blackwood called it the hanging tree, and they avoided it at all costs. It was said that the tree was cursed, a place where lost souls were drawn to hang, their spirits trapped for eternity. No one knew how long the tree had been there, or why it had become a beacon for the damned, but the stories were enough to keep even the bravest souls away. The first recorded account of the hanging tree dated back centuries, to a time when the forest was still uncharted territory. A group of explorers had ventured into the woods, seeking to map the land and uncover its secrets. They never returned. Months later, a search party found their remains hanging from the tree, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. The leader of the search party, a man named Elias Grayson, documented the discovery in his journal. "We found them at dusk, their bodies swaying like macabre ornaments. The tree itself seemed alive, its branches creaking as if in laughter. We cut them down, but the moment their bodies touched the ground, the forest came alive. The wind howled, the shadows moved, and we heard whispers, voices calling our names. We fled, leaving the bodies behind. I do not know what evil resides in that tree, but I pray no one else is foolish enough to seek it out." Elias's journal became a cautionary tale, passed down through generations. But despite the warnings, there were always those who were drawn to the hanging tree, driven by curiosity, desperation, or something darker. One such person was a young woman named Eleanor. She had grown up in Blackwood, hearing the stories of the hanging tree from her grandmother. Her grandmother had been a superstitious woman, filling Eleanor's head with tales of restless spirits and cursed places. But Eleanor was a skeptic. She didn't believe in curses or lost souls. To her, the hanging tree was just a tree. A strange and eerie one, yes, but nothing more. That all changed the night her brother disappeared. Thomas had always been reckless, the kind of person who thrived on danger. He had laughed at the stories of the hanging tree, calling them nonsense. "It's just a tree," he had said. "What's the worst that could happen?" But when Thomas failed to return home after a night of drinking, Eleanor knew something was wrong. She searched the village, asking everyone if they had seen him, but no one had. The last person to see him was the bartender, who said Thomas had mentioned going into the forest to see the hanging tree for himself. Eleanor's heart sank. She knew she had to find him. The forest was unnaturally quiet as Eleanor made her way to the hanging tree. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the occasional rustle of branches overhead. The air grew colder the deeper she went, and she felt a strange pressure, as if the forest itself were watching her. When she finally reached the tree, her worst fears were realized. Thomas was there, his body hanging from one of the branches. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, staring into nothingness. Eleanor screamed, rushing to him, but as she got closer, she noticed something strange. His body wasn't moving. It was perfectly still, as if frozen in time. She reached out to touch him, but the moment her fingers brushed his skin, the forest came alive. The wind howled, the branches of the hanging tree creaked and groaned, and Eleanor heard whispers, voices calling her name. She turned to run, but the shadows seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a circle of darkness. And then she saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms faint and translucent. They were the lost souls, the ones who had been drawn to the hanging tree and never left. Their faces were twisted in anguish, their eyes hollow and empty. They reached out to Eleanor, their fingers brushing against her skin, and she felt a coldness seep into her bones. "Join us," they whispered. "Join us." Eleanor screamed, but no sound came out. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The lost souls surrounded her, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. She felt herself being pulled toward the tree, her feet dragging across the ground as if guided by an unseen force. Just as she was about to give in to the darkness, a voice cut through the chaos. "Eleanor!" It was her grandmother. The old woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her face pale but determined. In her hands, she held a small, leather-bound book, the journal of Elias Grayson. "You have to fight it," her grandmother shouted. "The tree feeds on fear. You have to resist." Eleanor focused on her grandmother's voice, using it as an anchor to pull herself back from the brink. She closed her eyes, blocking out the whispers, and concentrated on her breathing. Slowly, the coldness began to fade, and the whispers grew quieter. When she opened her eyes, the lost souls were gone. The forest was silent once more, and the hanging tree stood still, its branches empty. Thomas's body was gone. Eleanor never returned to the hanging tree. She moved away from Blackwood, leaving the forest and its dark secrets behind. But the experience stayed with her, haunting her dreams and shaping her life in ways she couldn't fully understand. The hanging tree still stands in the heart of the Blackwood forest, its branches heavy with the weight of lost souls. It is a place of darkness and despair, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead. And though the villagers continue to avoid it, there are always those who are drawn to its cursed embrace. Their fates sealed the moment they step into its shadow. The tree where lost souls hang. In the heart of the ancient city of Eterna, where cobblestone streets wound like serpents through a labyrinth of Gothic spires and ivy-clad buildings, there stood a bell tower that defied all logic. Known simply as the Clock Tower, it was a towering structure of weathered stone, its face adorned with a massive clock whose hands moved with a peculiar, almost deliberate slowness. The bell within the tower was said to be as old as the city itself, its bronze surface etched with runes that no one could decipher. But what made the clock tower truly infamous was its peculiar quirk. It never struck the correct hour. The bell would ring at random intervals, its deep, resonant toll echoing through the city streets. Sometimes it would chime 3 times at noon, other times 7 at dusk. The citizens of Eterna had long since given up trying to set their watches by it. They accepted the clock tower as a peculiarity, a quirk of their city's rich and mysterious history. But there were whispers of something darker, something unnatural that dwelled within the tower. The legend of the clock tower began centuries ago, during the reign of a tyrannical king named Alaric the Unyielding. Alaric was a man obsessed with control, and he sought to impose his will on every aspect of his kingdom. He commissioned the construction of the clock tower as a symbol of his power, a monument to his mastery over time itself. The tower was to be the most precise timekeeping device in the world, its bell striking the hour with unerring accuracy. But Alaric's ambitions extended beyond the mortal realm. He sought to harness the power of time, to bend it to his will. To achieve this, he turned to a mysterious figure known only as the Chronomancer. The Chronomancer was a sorcerer of unparalleled skill, rumored to have discovered the secrets of time itself. Alaric promised him wealth and power beyond measure in exchange for his services. The Chronomancer agreed, and together they crafted the bell that would sit within the clock tower. The bell was forged from a rare alloy, its surface inscribed with ancient runes that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. The Chronomancer performed a ritual, binding the bell to the flow of time itself. But something went wrong. The ritual backfired, and the Chronomancer was consumed by the very forces he sought to control. His essence was absorbed into the bell, trapping him within its bronze shell. From that day forward, the clock tower was cursed. The bell no longer struck the correct hour, its tolls erratic and unpredictable. Alaric, furious at the failure, ordered the tower sealed and the bell destroyed. But no matter what was done, whether the bell was melted, shattered, or buried, it always reappeared within the tower, its runes glowing faintly as if in mockery. The story of the clock tower became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. The tower was left to decay, its once proud facade crumbling under the weight of time. But the bell continued to ring, its tolls echoing through the city like the heartbeat of some ancient, slumbering beast. Centuries passed, and the city of Eterna grew and changed, but the clock tower remained a constant, a silent sentinel watching over the city. It was largely ignored, its existence relegated to the realm of myth and superstition. But there were always those who were drawn to it, lured by the promise of secrets and power. One such person was a young historian named Alara. She had spent her life studying the history of Eterna, and the clock tower had always fascinated her. She believed that the stories of the cursed bell were more than just legends. They were clues to a greater mystery, one that could rewrite the history of the city. Ilara spent months researching the clock tower, poring over ancient texts and deciphering cryptic manuscripts. She learned of Alaric and the chronomancer, of the ritual that had gone wrong, and of the bell that could not be destroyed. She became convinced that the key to understanding the tower lay within the bell itself. One stormy night, Ilara decided to investigate the clock tower. She had obtained a key from an old locksmith who claimed it would open the tower's sealed door. The key was ancient, its surface tarnished and worn, but it fit perfectly into the lock. With a creak, the door swung open, revealing a spiral staircase that led up into the darkness. Ilara climbed the stairs, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The air grew colder the higher she went, and she felt a strange pressure, as if the tower itself were alive and watching her. When she reached the top, she found herself in a small, circular chamber. In the center of the room hung the bell, its surface glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Ilara approached the bell, her heart pounding. She reached out to touch it, but before her fingers could make contact, the bell began to ring. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the chamber and shaking the very foundations of the tower. Ilara fell to her knees, clutching her ears, but the sound was inside her, filling her mind with visions. She saw the chronomancer, his face twisted in agony as he was consumed by the ritual. She saw Alaric, his eyes filled with madness as he ordered the tower sealed. And she saw the countless souls who had been drawn to the tower over the centuries, their fates intertwined with the cursed bell. When the ringing finally stopped, Ilara was alone in the chamber, her body trembling. She looked up at the bell, its runes glowing brighter than ever. And then she heard a voice, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from the bell itself. "You seek knowledge," the voice said, "but knowledge comes at a price." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am the chronomancer," the voice replied. "I am the keeper of time, bound to this bell for eternity. You have awakened me, and now you must take my place." Ilara shook her head, her mind reeling. "No, I didn't mean to." "It is too late," the chronomancer interrupted. "The bell has chosen you. You are now its guardian, its voice. You will ring the hours, but they will never be correct. For time is not a straight line. It is a spiral, a loop, a paradox, and you are now a part of it." Before Ilara could protest, she felt a surge of energy course through her body. Her vision blurred, and she felt herself being pulled into the bell, her essence merging with the chronomancer's. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the chamber. She was the bell, her consciousness fused with its ancient, cursed metal. The clock tower still stands in the heart of Eterna, its bell tolling at random intervals, its hands moving with a deliberate slowness. The citizens of the city have grown accustomed to its erratic behavior, but they no longer ignore it. They feel its presence, a constant reminder of the thin line between past and present, between life and eternity. Ilara's story is just one of many. The clock tower continues to draw the curious, the desperate, and the brave. Its cursed bell a beacon for those who seek to unravel the mysteries of time. But once the bell claims you, there is no escape. You become a part of its endless cycle, a guardian of its secrets, a voice in the void. The bell tower that never strikes the correct hour.